This is my final video on Sequestor Zone, and it's a response to his video, What is Wrong with Feminism, Part 5. Now, he begins with abortion, and how women's reproductive rights are under threat. Now, he uses clips, and he uses clips out of context. For instance, he uses a clip of, I think, a Democrat woman calling a certain bill rape insurance, and this is basically politics 101. It's actually quite ingenious, actually, but it isn't rape insurance. To say that it's rape insurance is very disingenuous. What it is, or what it was rather, was in the state of Michigan, the people, men and women, nearly the same number anyway, did not want to subsidize, directly or indirectly, women's abortions. Now, whether that would be just a mistake or rape, which, by the way, pregnancy from rape is extremely rare, so very disingenuous to say the least. But what this politician did was she basically took it and said, well, it's a war on women. It's another example of the war on women. No, getting someone to subsidize your abortion is not. No. So there's that, and then Sequestor Zone talks about Planned Parenthood and about how they're being closed down, and I'm not an American, but I did some research on Planned Parenthood, and apparently they're fucking terrible. Apparently they actually get the opposite results. Yeah, it's quite funny, in fact. Instead of actually reducing the number of pregnancies, they actually increase pregnancies. And so when they start closing these Planned Parenthoods down in Texas, what they found is that the pregnancy rate for underage like halves. So I don't think this is a war on women. I don't think men and women want to pay for other people's abortions or just for other people's kids. Not directly and not indirectly. I know this is hard to believe, but people don't want to do that. Okay, so that's my thoughts on that. Oh, and by the way, if you want to, just a tip to feminists, if you want to secure your reproductive rights, and by the way, regulation is not necessarily a bad thing, but if you want to secure your reproductive rights, do this. Advocate for euthanasia. Advocate for being able to sell your kidneys, all these kind of things. Advocate for them because they are interlinked. They're all about personal agency. They're all about personal autonomy. So yeah, advocate for these things, and you may be able to entrench the rights of your reproductive rights much more effectively, rather than just banging on a dead horse all day.
At risk. My health insurance is expensive enough, and I don't need to add a lot of extra people that go out.
Then he talks about the whole definition of feminism and about how we're paranoid about who makes the definition of feminism. And it's not so much that. It's the problem with the definition of feminism, Sequestor Zone, is that it's actually two definitions that are both very, very different from each other, and yet are coerced together whenever they feel like it. I'll give you an example. In the low bar, I have an article to The Guardian, and it's an article by Hardly Freeman. Long story short, basically it was to do with the whole ban bossy thing, and she says, "Oh, that's not enough. We need to teach feminism in school," which tells you just how perverse feminism has become and how ingrained it's become that they're actually advocating for this crap. Anyway, in the low bar, in the comment section of this article, she got basically called out from it. You can't that it's an ideology, that it's not for equality, that it's ideological, and she got called out for it. And what she basically said was, "You do realize that feminism is about equality, right?" So it's this kind of, every time you point something out about feminism, every time you point about how the group of feminism isn't really for equality, but is actually a female supremacist group, they immediately go back to the second definite, I think I think it's the first definition of feminism, which is that it's about equality. But they keep merging the two together. So when you're attacking feminism, and yeah, I genuinely believe this is part of leftist tactics. You see, by combining two definitions together, it silences people from making criticisms over feminism. So if you say, I hate feminists, people will automatically think, oh, you want to go back to the 1950s or 1960s, which, by the way, we MRAs do not want to. There's the 1950s and 1960s weren't exactly great times for men either. But anyway, as I was saying, by merging the two definitions together, you create this silencing effect. You create this censorship, and it's all about, that is a big part of feminism itself. Being able to silence people and call them misogynistic whenever you challenge them on their true aims, which is gender superiority, or gender supremacy, should I say. Anyway, going back to this comment section thing, the comment that basically called her out on this got 787 hits, as I am reading right now, and Harley Freeman's response got something like 645, and I think this indicates to me that a lot of people think the same. In fact, the majority of people think the same, that it's actually a female supremacy movement with neurotic leaders. And yeah, there's a lot of comments in response to Harley Freeman's response. In fact, I think it is about 100 or something like that. So we MRAs are not the only one who's bringing this up at Sequestor Zone. We're not the only ones who are paranoid. We know what's going on. We know your strategy. We know you like to we know how you like to use the definitions to your own gain. Next, he talks about the feminization of poverty and about how we MRAs are champions of free market capitalism, which isn't true. We do not assign ourselves on the left. We do not assign ourselves on the right. We are kind of neutral when it comes to politics and economic sphere. Although we do have a separation, we do kind of want a separation between socialism and economics. In other words, we're against things like affirmative action, for instance. Also, I'm not a libertarian, just throwing that out there. Anyway, as for the whole capitalism poverty thing, what you have to remember is the definitions that we use for poverty. You see, according to the Labour Party, that is the Socialist Party in the UK, well, socialist in name anyway. According to the Labour Party, poverty is defined as being 60% less than the average income. What is it? Why do I bring this up? Well, put it this way. Let's say I have no car and my next door neighbour has a Bentley. 10 years later, I have a Bentley and my next door neighbour has a Ferrari. By the definition that the Labour Party uses, I'm still poorer than my next door neighbour. However, my living standard has increased. And capitalism, with all its flaws it has, is the best economic system we have. As for the feminization of poverty thing, well, a lot can be attributed to the rise of single motherhood and the rise of single parent motherhood by choice. So I think that explains a lot of the feminization of poverty. And I think it also explains a lot of the prison rates, the incarceration rates of black men as well. Because if you take into considerations the single parent homes, there is no racial disparity, which I think is very surprising but very telling of our current paradigm that we're living in right now. Also, as I mentioned in my previous video, there is still the element of culture and self-fulfilling prophecies of this culture. For instance, gangster rap. Also, about how we think capitalism is super special awesome and at the same time we criticize capitalism for certain things. Well, under capitalism, we have the power to boycott. So, for instance, we MRAs complain about how men are portrayed in TV. However, one of the things about capitalism is we have the ability to boycott certain things. So, for instance, if we don't like the way The Simpsons is the way The Simpsons portrays the father, for instance, as a sort of buffoon, we can boycott it. We can not consume that product until they change it. Similarly, women can do this as well. So, for instance, take those girls' magazines, the ones that spy on celebrities and take pictures of them when they're not looking too well or too attractive. Uh, Men don't buy them magazines, by the way. What women can do is they can just not buy those magazines. So that is something they can do. That they're perfectly entitled to do that. However, they don't, which I think is very telling. As for the whole paternal surrender thing, this is where I really disagree with you, Sequestor Zone. I really disagree with you. First of all, it's true that men do have contraception, or to be more precise, two forms of contraception. There's the condom, which isn't 100% accurate, but let's presume it is for the meantime. There's that. And then there's what they're called now, vasectomies. That's what they're called. Now, vasectomies are permanent, and also I think they've been linked to cancer. So men in reality only have one form of contraception, the condom. There's a lot of reasons for that, which I won't dive into. But anyway, now the thing about the condom is it is a visible form of contraception. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, let's say you have a girlfriend, and your girlfriend says she's on the pill, and that you don't need to use a condom. In fact, she tells you no sex unless you use the condom. And she reassures you that she's on the pill. You cannot know if she's on the pill, and this leaves you vulnerable to fraud. So it's not even, it's not equal as you make it out to be. And in contrast, the woman has so many forms of contraception, it is not funny. It is absolutely ridiculous. The women have 100% control over their fertility. And again, there's a lot of reasons for this. I'll link to Ramsey Paul. He's got a good argument as to why there's no male pill. Whilst it's true that the man still has sex with knowing there is still some risk of pregnancy, this does not excuse his right to paternal surrender, and there's a number of reasons for this. Because if you do go by this logic, then you have to get rid of, say, abortions, because, well, a woman knows, the woman accepts the risk, for instance. But even if you don't buy that argument, women still have the right to maternal surrender, even after, say, pregnancy and have an abortion. If not an abortion, she can give it up for adoption. She still has all those rights. So she has consented by automatically, she has consented to parenthood. The father, the biological father, who doesn't even know if he's the biological father, he could be guessing if he is. He on the other hand has no right. He's thrusted into fatherhood, whatever that means these days. Today, fatherhood is basically an ATM machine, a walking dildo ATM machine. Anyway, so the woman has this right, and I emphasize the word right, to maternal surrender. The father does not have the equal right to paternal surrender. Now, if you're a feminist, and feminism is about equality, remember, we have to have that right as well. And this isn't a small thing. This is not a small thing. This is something that is throwing 50,000 men in prison for failure to pay child support. And these aren't deadbeats. The term deadbeat is pejorative, in that many of these fathers, these biological fathers, they either just did not want to have the child, or they couldn't afford the child, they lost their job, whether it's because of the recession, etc. So these men are innocent victims, and they are going to debtor's prison. And that is incredibly immoral, and it's not good for the child either. It's not in the best interest of the child. And they haven't consented to this situation at all. Now we can get into technicalities like, what if you're in a marriage? Now, I can see the argument of that. I can see the argument of forfeiting the right to paternal surrender because if you're married, unless of course you can prove that the paternity is not yours, I can entertain that the forfeit of paternal surrender because marriage is an institution made for making children. So by default, you are consenting to having a child. However, someone who is cohabiting or just has an affair or a one-night fling, for instance, he's not consenting to fatherhood, and it is very cruel to put this burden on him. It's very cruel, and I don't want it to. There are two solutions to this. Number one, you can get rid of the woman's right to maternal surrender, which they got because they killed their kids. Let's not forget that they killed their kids. You can either tell them they can't have that right, this arbitrary right that was given to them, or you can give each parent the right to surrender the child responsibilities. And we can, and I think, and we can talk about how the government could step in and just give some sort of check or something, which would be a far more humane solution. Like I said, we're not all libertarians. It's a far more. I think that would be a far more humane. Besides, I think there's $300 million that's not collected. So the system is broke anyway. Not to mention incredibly corrupt. And the 50,000 men in prison, I think I don't know how much it costs £40,000 a year to put someone in prison in the UK. So God knows what it's like in America. So financially, it's a better situation. Also, you can't use the argument that it would be bad for the mother because the same situation is happening right now. You know, there are single mothers right now who don't get child support because the man cannot pay. So there's already poverty right now. So it would be a far better system if men had the right to paternal surrender. I can't see it though because I think, and this is where I go into conspiracy theory mode, but I think feminists are against it. I'm pretty sure they are. That's all I got to say about paternal surrender. Oh, except for the fact that you are so against this, I think shows where your priorities are, Sequestor Zone. Because you didn't think of this, did you? You didn't think of any of these potential solutions. You just went straight in and thought, well, that's incredibly selfish. You can't have that. You can't have that. And there's no argument as to why not. You haven't thought this. You haven't thought of this at all. You haven't thought in depth about this. And that is because you are more interested in gaining compliments from your harem of fans, of your female fans. So much so that you are willing to put men under the bus. And I think that's very sad. As for the whole parental leave thing, yeah, it may be true that it is more or less 50-50 in Australia. I'm not really sure, but let's just say it is. Now, I don't think, unless I'm wrongly mistaken, I don't believe you get 100% of your pay if you're on leave, which may explain why men are less likely to take it and women are more likely to take it. Also, I think women take it because I like being mothers, but anyway, so men are more likely to take parental leave. Now, it's true that if you're an employer, you get reimbursed for your staff for their leave. Okay, that's true. The thing is on top of women more likely to taking it, on top of that, if you hire a woman and she gets pregnant and she takes this leave, it's not the money. It's not the money that you're concerned with. It's the experience. You've lost a lot of your experience, and you have to replace that experience with temporary vacancies, which may cost a lot of money, and it may, if let's say it's something critical, if the job is something very, very critical, and you can't afford for that woman to go on leave for a long time, it can be a huge burden to your business. And also, if it's let's say for instance, let's say your job involves a portfolio of clients and you need a close relationship with that client, a good 4, 5, 6 months, whatever, of leave can be very damaging, and you'll be worth less when you come back because you do not have these relationships. So, that explains the pay gap, and I think why women are less hireable in that sense because of biology. So I don't think you explained it away at all. Also, the reason why paternity leave exists is because was actually to make men less employable, because it was to put more doubt into the employer's mind over who would. Basically, it's social engineering. That's basically what it is. Also, I don't think employers assess the likelihood that somebody is to commit suicide. And also, if men do commit more suicide more often, I don't see how that ends up on the balance sheet, unless of course it's something like football or someone who is so incredibly valuable. No, that's absurd as well. I can't believe you actually came up with that example, Sequestor Zone. That was terrible. As for how the 5 cents is still supposedly unaccountable, well, the thing about that is, according to the study that uses, which uses algorithm, you cannot predict 100% the reason why someone is employable and not employable. In other words, life is not an algorithm, and so there's a lot of reasons that the other 5 cents could be made up with. So, for instance, women are less likely to ask for pay raises. They're less likely to negotiate their starting salary. I'll link below an article in The Guardian. And there's many other things that could explain this. Life is full of variables. So I really doubt that the other 5 cents is due to discrimination. You still have to prove that the 5 cents is due to discrimination, Sequester Zone. You can't just point out the 5 cents and then say it's because it's such a small amount, and there are many other variables that could take place. Also, if I'm an employer and a woman offers less than, say, a man, as I would have hired a man, it is not up to the employer to basically say, hey, you know what, I would have paid you more if you'd said, if you said I would work for, say, £6.50 an hour, instead of saying I want to work for the minimum wage. You know what I mean? It's not up to the employer to go out. It's not up to the employer to forfeit his best interest, which is to make profit. It is not up to the employer to sacrifice that. Women have to ask for a bigger pay raise, which is why in my previous video I suggested that as a law it should be that if you're working in a business, all wages should be disclosed, whether you're male or female, and by doing that you get competition. You get perfect competition. I'm a big fan of that. I think that's a really good idea. I think it's much better than the minimum wage. So that's my thoughts on that. Finally, as for the whole university discrimination thing, I'm curious if there's a bit more to it than that. For instance, does it work both ways? So, for instance, let's say a man is more likely to get a job than a woman. Okay, is a man more likely to be fired for the job and get less sympathy than the woman? In other words, are the expectations of the men higher than the women? And is this attributable to, say, feminism? Basically, is basically the victim mentality of feminism, which portrays women as weak and vulnerable. Does that give women more sympathy, and at the same time turn employers off women for, say, because they think, oh, she's just going to be a burden, she's vulnerable? I don't know. There's a lot to it, and I think there's a lot more to it that needs to be researched before we just willy-nilly go out and blame patriarchy, for instance. So that's all I've got for now. Thanks for listening. Sequester Zone, you're a fucking bastard. I hate you. Have a nice day.